Let me stop yapping and let me introduce the men of the hour, Dr. Greg Carr, Haile Gerima.
Well, thank you for that hip-hop-ish, bombastic introduction. I was sitting there sweating. Anyway, thank you everybody for coming. And I think before I give the mic to our distinguished brother, the real teacher at Howard University, Professor Carr, the real teacher. Yeah. Shut up. You see now he's out of. Let's stay with the hip hop formality. Okay. So I just want to say a few things. For me, we hopefully today and tomorrow, with the play that Ngugi and Misheri Mugo, who is his partner in crime in the writing of Kimathi, the Mau Mau leader that the British hanged, is really a good way of paying tribute to both Ngugi and Misheri Mugo, who also passed earlier before Ngugi. I just want to say, I can't say, I know Misheri Mugo a lot, but Ngugi, I don't want to say I know him because I feel Ngugi is a very enigmatic, complicated human being. And to say I know him would be an understatement in my view. But I remember in 1978, when I first met him in Kenya, with Misheri introduced me to him. From then on, we have been in few panels, discussions, what people would call argument, but discussions, because he's a very driven intellectual who likes to discuss issues, especially, I can't say in literature, because when I met him, my occasion in London, Zimbabwe, was really film. I, as a filmmaker, going to panels, discussions, and because of that, I have met him, and we have discussed about his idea of African cinema, and also his interest, even at one point wanting to come to Howard to study cinema. I think because of Samben Usman, who is a novelist but also a filmmaker, has influenced a lot of African novelist literature people. Sometimes they get so disappointed with the African cinema treatment of stories, they like to just say, no, why don't I make it instead of, in fact, Ali Holy Shoinka had done a play, his own play into a movie. I remember showing it at Howard to my students, and so there's this effort, but he didn't pursue it. So we can talk more later. But the way I want to go about it is I'll come in later to discuss, my encounter when I wanted to do. In fact, 1978, when I went to Zambia, Kenya, I think Mozambique, if I'm not wrong, and Senegal. I was going around to do a film, a definitive film at that time since I was younger, ambitiously a definitive film on Africa, from primitive colonialism to neo-colonialism to liberation, the war of independence, but war of liberation with a Marxist accent. These journeys I wanted, and he was one of the intellectuals I wanted to interview towards that, because I think and not only is he a good writer, which all of you I'm sure here know, but he's also a very committed activist, literary activist for the liberation of Africa. And he was one of the people I had earmarked to interview for that film. I don't know how many people have seen a film called The Hour of the Furnace. It's a film made in Latin America in 3 parts about the political, economic, social, and revolutionary period of Latin America. And the film, especially The Hour of the Furnace, Part 1, is the best, like the book we have here called Open Veins to Latin America. It's almost a definitive documentary film. To this day, none can come near to it. No European documentary film could come near it, nor American. It still remains one of the most significant films made by Argentinian filmmakers, called The Hour of the Furnace. It's from my student days at UCLA that I continued to bring that film. I brought that film to Howard and showed it every year in my class because it's cinematically significant, but politically also speaks about Latin America and imperialism. And so I was influenced to make a film about Africa, something like that. It never happened. That's another story. So to me, just in that period, I had Professor Mandani, the guy's father. He was one I earmarked because he was another important historian, political historian on Africa. I've known him from earlier times. I initially saw him on BBC, although he was deported out of Uganda by Idi Amin's time. He remained the best African intellectual in my view. And so I earmarked to interview him in Ngugi. There was also Amir of Egyptian intellect. So they were very important, critical people I had earmarked that will really speak about the ultimate issue of independence and liberation on African theme. And that's the time I met Ngugi and earmarked him to be part of the film, but again, the film never happened. So I just, before, this is how far, and I will speak more later, but I wanted to give the mic to Professor Carr to really, map out Ngugi's critical placement in literature and African intellectual struggle.
I got one.
Do you want me to introduce this guy?
No. Yes, we're here. I am a lieutenant in General Garima's army. No, there's nothing else. Turn it. You turn it down. Y'all, then please turn the microphone.
In fact, I will introduce him. I'll tell you seriously. No. He's a shy guy. I don't know.
Lowering expectations, brother.
Howard University. I'm serious, and I hope other professors don't get. To me, the most committed, to students, the most committed professor, who's not only a teacher, master teacher, but a friend of Howard. See, it's easy to be a teacher at Howard and be a landlord, and then authoritarianly perpetuate the false idea of pedagogy. He is a friend of his students. They have total access to him. In fact, I always wondered, we're pulling him, they're pulling him, everybody's pulling him. The community pulls him, etc. So for me, it's a brother I really admire and cherish, that he does exist in a period here at Sankofa. We're trying to build a cultural house of intellectual thoughts, because I believe once black people get their brains right, their mindset, nobody has to teach black people how to make revolution or how to change. To me, the struggle is how to sharpen our intellectual magnitude So we can see complicated orbits being thrown at us by even sellout black people. And so he is one I always have as my brother, as my comrade. And, Sankofa literally, has one important godfather, and that's him. And so for me, my students, and then also, let me tell you, I didn't know him from nowhere. Carr, I didn't know him. At Howard, I don't want to know nobody. So I never went to a faculty meeting, the school-wide. I went to my department commitment, but I never, because I felt Howard teachers got more preoccupied about salary, merit increase, and stuff like that. And I felt, why don't we first make it the best place first before we think about our salary? That was my philosophy. And so I was alienated, never went to no meetings. But students kept coming, talking to me about this guy in Siberia called Carr, Greg Carr. Who is he? And finally, my own son, who is the oldest one, who was at Howard and very alienated. He would say, Haile, do you know Howard is known in the world by what? I said, what? Fashion. That's how he looks at his residency at Howard. And so he was also tired of his father and mother being bookish, very, social change. And he was not interested in, he felt we were poor because of that, maybe. So he came one time, and then my office at Howard said, there's this professor. I was sitting outside listening to his lecture. I'm going to take his class. And I felt so, I've heard that name flying left and right by Howard film students who go out of their way to take his class. Not many do that. Then my son said that, and then I just looked for this guy, said, who is resurrecting all these kids? And there was this guy here. And I'm very, I'll tell you, I'm a very indebted person for his existence around us. And that's Professor, Carr here. Thank you, my brother, for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. You can imagine why it's uncomfortable. I imagine any of us would feel the same way listening to you, to Haile Gerima, because Haile and Shriek, of course, their vision and your sacrifice, never falling to the gravitational pull, the bright lights, Hollywood or conventional work, and standing strong to build what is now, for over a quarter century, more than a generation, been the maroon space in this city, one of the maroon spaces in the world, and the place, as far as I'm concerned, that is whatever Howard projects itself to be in the world, this is in fact the thing that they would like people to think they are. But the living, beating heart of our people is Sankofa, and at the heart of Sankofa is Haile Gerima. So I want to thank you, Baba, for that. I came here looking for him. So there's only reason to come, to find the revolutionaries. So I want to thank you for that and for those kind words. And I'm going to lower now expectations around this conversation, at least as far as my part of it is concerned, because I think that we, in paying tribute to your comrade and Ngugi wa Thiong'o, I want to ask, does anybody have any favorite books or plays or memoirs, anything affiliated with Ngugi? What's yours? The Nine Daughters, yes. Okay. Absolutely. Decolonizing the African Mind. Yes. Oh, yeah. Hey, what's going on, Shmark?
Something torn and new towards an African Renaissance.
Yes, sir. That's the one I got in my lap. No question. No question. So we actually then have heard a couple of collections of essays and fiction, and something that is very powerful about Ngugi, like you, simply refusing to bow to the West. And equally, perhaps even more important, refusing to abandon the people. because it's very easy for intellectuals, as we know, to abandon the people, to represent them, to discuss them, to write about them, to capitalize on them, to become predators of a sort. But Ngugi never did that. Even as every conceivable award, he was either granted by the West or nominated for. But at the heart of, you say he's an enigma. That's interesting. He's kind of complicated. I only got a chance to talk with him one time. We invited him here for a freshman seminar because of Something Torn and New, the book. And we'll talk more about that as we get into this. But I just want to make a couple of initial remarks, and then maybe we can have a conversation about this man, born in 1938. This coming January, I guess, would have been his 88th birthday. Born in the decade after Didan Kimathi, of course. So you have the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army in struggle. The name Mau Mau affixed to them to try to diminish what they were, but in fact, this revolutionary struggle to throw out the British and claim and self-determine the land. He himself, out of a landless family, laboring class, one of 28 children, which I guess is very African. His father had 4 wives. He was the product of the 3rd wife, and then the tensions between the parents. He looked at his mother in particular, said, "You're going to go to school." And so, like one of his contemporaries, who is still with us, I think Aikwe Amar was born in 1939, so he's still with us on the other side of the continent. And Ngugi went to Lyons High School, which was considered one of, if not the best school in Kenya, and then from there to Makerere, of course, which is where I guess we'll come back around to Mahmoud Mamdani, who's just written a book on Idi Amin in Kenya, and Uganda. And of course, he was writing from a very young age, writing for the school newspaper, writing, just putting things out, and very committed to representing the people he came from. Of course, we know that in the war the British had over trying to colonize Kenya and subjugate those people, literally burning his village, burning his home to the ground, and coming home from school, from high school, and realizing my home is not there anymore. Y'all burnt my place down. He had family, siblings on all sides of the conflict, some siding with the British, others killed, his siblings killed as a result of being connected with that struggle. But in Ngugi, between his early upbringing and where we sit now talking about him as he made transition, I think, and Brother Shamarka brought up Something Torn and New. Maybe that's where I'll start. I don't know if we have, Jonathan got a whole stack of Ngugi books back there. I know the latest one, Decolonizing Language and Other Revolutionary Ideas. Have y'all seen? Monday, very. Let me see. If there's a place to start, if folks wanted to start, in his incredibly productive life of writing every kind of form and doing filmmaking, as you say, that last collection is kind of a valedictory of sorts. We know he wrote several memoirs, but this Decolonizing Language gets to the essence of what Ngugi was about. It's a series of essays divided in 2 parts, the book, and then you go through it, and he starts talking about the function of intellectuals and the function of language. And he makes a distinction between knowledge, for example, and education. He talks about knowledge being the ability to acquire more information, more awareness of the world, and add what you didn't know to what you know in order to develop your full human potential. And he says, by contrast, education is really about it's a form of socialization. People are lining you up to fit into whatever plans they have for you. And that tension is something that he lived as an exile from the 1980s forward, returning and then having a terror encounter upon his return to Kenya as a prisoner. A prisoner when he said that, Jomo Kenyatta, who of course is a major figure for us. We think about him as a liberation figure, but in Ngugi is like, yeah, but Kenya is not his personal property. It belongs to all of us. He's imprisoned. He's in prison. Rap Moi puts him in prison for the better part of a year, and he writes a whole novel on toilet paper, famously, as we know. They could call me a monkey, but that would be a compliment. You know, the ancient Egyptians, for them, the baboon is the symbol of intelligence. So please call me a monkey. I'm very happy to be called a monkey, which actually is kind of, germane to our conversation tonight, because for Ngugi, the idea of indigeneity in African people, we got to define ourselves by our terms, and language sits at the center of that. But as I said, then Kenyatta passes away, makes transition, and Ngugi is released. But he never abandoned Kenya. He never abandoned Africa. And if we think about how he is narrated by the West, the first major writer to emerge out of East Africa. No, because as we know, as he struggled to change departments, whether it be here in the University of California system or at Makerere, let's abolish the concept of English literature and include all forms of language, beginning with mouth-to-ear language. So to call him the first writer to emerge out of East Africa is almost an insult to Africans. And we know, of course, in Ngugi in the 70s saying, I'm going to write in Gikuyu. I'm going to write in my language, then I'll translate it into English or any other language, but I'm going to write in my language for my people. And, the reason when he does, and I won't butcher the language to try to pronounce it, but of course, because English is the tongue that was stuffed into our mouths. I'll marry when I want, and having the people do the play. Say it again. Say it. Gahikia Deda. Is that close? Close enough. African language is tonal. I could have said nothing at that point. But this is why I think it's very important, of course, to talk about this in this context, because in Ngugi, while he wrote in the languages of the people that he came from, beginning, of course, with his first language, Kikuyu, the translations is how we were able to encounter him. And like Alvin said, Decolonizing the Mind was the first Ngugi piece that I read, and I guess I was in graduate school. And of course, it's very seductive. The whole idea that we have to, in many ways, invert how we think about ourselves. And in Ngugi being a global African, one of his small book of essays, Globalectics, talks about how they wanted to globalize the curriculum at the university and said we must deal with our traditions, mouth to ear, written in all forms, and abandon these Western concepts. It's very seductive to those of us who were not born and raised on the continent of Africa, and for those, I suppose, on the continent of Africa who have abandoned language. But the seduction then invites us into the hard work. And I think that's where I want to just say a couple more words, and then we can be in conversation about this. I think in Ngugi's ability to invite us into difficult work and then model what that work looks like, I think is probably the thing that endures the most for me. And I'll just say a couple of things about that as it relates to Something Torn and New, as Brother K just said. That book. When the book came out, this was 2009, we had a program in Philadelphia Freedom Schools. It still continues. And every summer, at its peak, we had, I guess, about 400 high school students from around the city of Philadelphia. Not the best GPAs, not the worst, just regular students, high school students. Anybody wanted to sign up, we would have them. And they would teach for 6 weeks in the summer, smaller children, elementary school and middle school students. And once a week, we would pull them out of their classrooms to convene a citywide conversation around a common text. And I'll never forget going into a bookstore at the University of Pennsylvania and seeing this new book, Something Torn and New. And so I said, Ngugi, Ngugi is, okay, let me look. Oh, this is very interesting. Because Ngugi's dealing with this question of language. The 4 small chapters, each of them based on lectures he had given around the continent of Africa. The Steve Biko lecture, which is chapter 4, where he gets into the question of black consciousness, is very important. A talk he gave at the University of Makerere, and another one that he gave at Harvard University, the first chapter for Henry Louis Gates, thereby showing the layers and complicated nature. Ngugi seemed to get along with just about everybody, even if he was fighting with him. He seems a very humble guy, but he always in conversation and dialogue, always trying to build consensus, and where they could disagree, at least not be disagreeable about it. But in that book, he opens by talking about dismemberment. And he talks about how the continent of Africa and African people went through 2 stages. The first was literally taking people out of Africa by the millions. And then he said the one that's ongoing is the dismemberment of our memory and our mind from ourselves. And he says that ongoing process, which he opens the book in the small introduction by saying this book is about the decolonization of modernity. We got to decolonize modernity. And interestingly enough, after beginning with a couple of examples of continental Africans who were harmed by the British, a leader whose head was severed from his body and taken to the museum, another brother who was buried upside down facing away from Mount Kenya. He talks about the fact that the British's first crime against another people was not against the Africans, but against the Irish. And he talks about how the Irish, the proud language and traditions, the attempt was made by the British to destroy them by destroying their language. And he talks about, he quotes Edmund Spencer to say, if you can get inside them and get at their language, you can literally take their memories from them, and that will destroy their ability to resist. And as an African person who is a descendant of those who were trafficked, realizing that his commitments to language was something that for me was something to aspire to, and at the same time something to recognize had had an impact on me that I still couldn't fully grasp. That hit very hard, because it's like, well, that not only was done to us, can we remember? And what would it take to remember? And so to have a city full of high school students grappling with the question of remembering something that you might think, okay, that's very foreign to them. They wouldn't be thinking about this. But then the idea that we never stop being Africans, which, and we fully know that. But then what are the keys to fully remembering? He gets into that in chapter 2, which is a very interesting, I mean, we could talk about this too, and I don't want to get too deep into the conversation, because he starts with the story of Isis and Osiris, and the famous story that is from Plutarch, which is why I say it's kind of complicated, where Osiris was dismembered, or Asar was dismembered, and then Aset puts him back together. A story that ironically, and here's the irony in it, came from the Greeks, not the Egyptians. That's something that Plutarch made up, basically, because when you look at the ancient Egyptians, they didn't tell the story that way. But Ngugi uses it to talk about what we have to do to remember ourselves. And he gets into Marcus Garvey, and he talks about the Pan-Africanists and Ethiopianism. He said, here's a Kenyan with a global perspective. And in being in conversation with a bunch of teenagers in Philadelphia about this, what began to emerge was this sense that we have been harmed and we can't just make peace with it. So then the next question, it becomes, well, what do you do now? How do we remember? And when Ngugi starts talking about the class dimension in this, how, and he uses his friend Chinua Achebe to grapple with that. How he talks about how in Arrow of God, for example, from Achebe, the brother comes to the village and takes the sacred python back to the Western school to show them that we have culture, but you took the python from the village. Is this the price? You've taken our soul to show it to somebody else, but you didn't guard the thing that brought you into existence. And Ngugi is grappling with that. And as our young people are reading this, we're having a conversation about what do you have that you value so sacredly that you would never show it to somebody to try to prove your humanity to somebody else. And it becomes an interesting conversation. And then what you see is young people grappling with Ngugi in a way that, had he not taken the time to kind of put these broad themes into the universe, we probably never would have thought about it. And so and I could talk more about what happened in that process later, but a couple of years later, here at Howard, when we had a course called Freshman Seminar, and Haile came and spoke with them, showed them some of the work on the Maroons. It was during the time that it was the president of Howard University was absolutely committed to modeling what it looked like to remember. Sidney Rabeau was very much committed to that. Well, we picked something torn and new again. And this time, we asked Bobby and Ngugi to come. And he came to Howard after a semester-long conversation that young people had had with the text and writing, and he spent a whole day with them, listening to their presentations, discussing with them, and then that evening he gave a lecture. And in the conversation, I think the thing that struck me the most was his generosity and being very solicitous of these young people's ideas. Because Howard, unlike Philadelphia, well, everywhere African people are, but certainly Howard probably more so than any other historically black college, maybe in any university, has the whole Pan-African world in one space. And so when you've got 1,000 young people grappling with a text that's going to touch on the entire African world simply based on who they are in the room, the idea of remembering takes on a different flavor, a different contour, because you've got continental Africans in the room, the children of continental Africans who were probably pulled away from learning the languages of their parents and grandparents, who for the first time were grappling with the cost of that, with someone who was thoroughly committed to recovering and remembering. You got Africans who are the children of those who were trafficked in the Western Hemisphere, who are used to saying, well, this is the culture of Jamaica, this is the culture of Trinidad, or this is the culture of Puerto Rico or Dominican Republic, realizing, as Ngugi has said, that English is not an African language, that Spanish is not an African language, that French and Portuguese are not African languages, and neither is Patois, neither is Creole, neither is Pidgin English in West Africa, refusing to compromise on the question of language, no matter how beautiful it was. And then finally, as it relates to this particular text, him, however, recognizing from a poem by Kamal Braithwaite that African people have been torn, have been dismembered, have had our languages attempted to be killed, what he calls linguicide, or starved, what he calls lingua fam. But at the same time, what has emerged out of that was something new. So that even in that criticism, even in that critique, rather, even in that idea that we have work to do, there's still an embrace of us in saying, no, you're still part of the family. It doesn't get us off the hook in terms of what we have to do, but it sets a marker down that we must do the hard work of language reconstruction. So there's a lot more we can talk about, and I hope we'll get into it. I don't want to get too far into it. We can talk about specific things and turns in his life. I'll say one other thing. His incredible productivity just before he made transition. It's interesting, and I'll say this because a lot of times I think we think about universities, people make their reputations very early. Like scholars will just write and do research and publish and publish and publish. And Ngugi was always writing, always doing that, but near the end of his life, up until the end, like I said, this book that just came out, Decolonizing Language and Other Revolutionary Ideas, is this year. It's like he took the sum of his experiences and put them in print for us. The Egyptians would call it a sebayit, a teaching. And those series of memoirs over the last 20 years and even the last 10 or even the last 5, the continuing productivity of the novels and then the essays, it's like he's saying, to me, that really is the way we should be thinking about scholarship. Until you have lived a life, to try to live it in your 20s or 30s for tenure and promotion and all, that's the exact opposite of the way it should be. He spoke as a wise elder near the end and has given us some of the most rich work that he did really in the last decade of his physical life. So I'm gonna stop there and then maybe we can just talk more about this. So.
Well.
Oh no, please don't clap. That's fine. We just having a conversation.
No, it's not. It was a very insightful for me. I'm sitting here learning a lot of the points you brought. Can I say something and see what you would say on, for example, the idea of writing in our own language, his argument with Chinua, etc.
Yes.
So to me, a lot of writers and a lot of us, it's very hard for us once we make a profession out of some field. It's very hard for us to denounce our own. In other words, he's been writing in English for a long time, and then he's just saying, let's face it, I'm not quenched.
Yes.
And for me, not many writers would, in fact, a lot of writers were offended. African writers were offended when he said, we should write on our, using our mother's tongue. And for me, it takes a very interesting personness to admit so much of his writing is so in English, but he's still not quenched. And often we never denounce our own what we have been for that length of time. You see what I'm saying? Yes, it's like we always defend occupation once we are in it, immersed, even if we find it really has been just a compromising occupation. Yes, and I remember a lot of the writers took it personal when he said, let's write in our own languages, because they were so built. I did have one serious discussion with a well-known, writer, African writer. We argued for days on this issue, because I do believe cinema has more, it's easy more to access our mother tongue in cinema than in literature, because we are molded by the literature of these Eurocentric temples, and so that to me is really, I kind of respected him. It's almost a denunciation of everything he wrote in English when he said, when he proposed, we need to write in our own language. Am I confusing?
Not at all.
Okay.
I think that's what it's one of the main things that makes Ngugi such an important figure and really fascinating, because he failed. We're having this all the books that'll be sold tonight, with a few exceptions, will be written in English. He didn't write in Gikuyu and say, you got to learn Gikuyu. He wrote in Gikuyu and then translated it into English, which is what gave him the global reputation. The second book, when he was James Ngugi, right, in the Heinemann series, After Things Fall Apart, 1957, Chinua Achebe reads Ngugi's work, and now Ngugi gets Weep Not Child. This is the London publishers. This is Heinemann. The publisher, and I forget his name, James, it may come to me, but the name of the book is Africa Writes Back. This was the guy who ran Heinemann Press, the little orange books, not like this orange, but some of them we have, And he said, it reminded me of what George Wine, the impresario, the white jazz impresario who would put together the concerts like Jazz at the Philharmonic, said about Miles Davis. They asked him about Louis Armstrong and Miles Davis, and George Wine said, I love Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong was, very generous, and of course, Louis Armstrong was the one that said, you need to get you a good white man behind you, and you can, he didn't worry about the money. He says, Miles Davis, I didn't love Miles Davis. I respected him and loved his music, but I didn't love Miles Davis. And I loved that, because George Wine was a pimp. I'm saying a loving pimp, a respecter of the music, but Miles Davis wasn't going to play the game. Now, the publisher at Heinemann that published Ngugi after he published Achebe and all them, in Africa Writes Back, he says, there was one author that I had the most trouble with. He was the most troublesome author I had, because he was always worried about his royalties and where the properties. It wasn't Ngugi. It was not Achebe, of course. It was Ayi Kwe Arma. And I just laughed because it made me think about what George Wine said about, no, these niggas, they're not gonna bow to you, sir. You're a pimp. That Heinemann Press series is a series, it's a pimp. Now, we're grateful for it because we got the books, but at what cost? Ngugi was feted by all the major institutions. The first chapter that said something new was at Harvard. You talk about Yale, you talk about Columbia, University of California, Irvine, all over the world. The idea of the perennial, will he get the Nobel this year? Will he get the Nobel this year? And then near the end of his life, the reporters lined up outside of his house, and they say, oh, he didn't get it. Now he goes out and serves them tea, and he said, I had to console them more. I didn't care. Of course he cared. Ayikwe Ahmad right now, as we sit here, we can't get him to leave Senegal. He's sitting over in Popengine like, I ain't never coming back to the United States of America. Y'all can go to hell, and I want all my copyrights back. He spends the end of his book, The Eloquence of the Scribes, talking about fighting. The name of the chapter is The Colonial Publisher as Pirate. You know what I'm saying? And he publishes all the correspondence with Heinemann. Give me my stuff back. And I'm saying that because Ngugi sits somewhere between Achebe and Armagh. He didn't go like Armagh, like F y'all. And then Armagh has now taken on the major project of translating ancient Egyptian stories and documents and literature, starting with the Meta Neter and then translating it into a dozen or so African languages with a team he calls the Shemsu Bak. And they now translate. So if you want to read in Kiswahili, if you want to read in Yoruba or Zulu, you can literally see in his books, the first line is Meta Neter, and then the African languages translate line by line. And then he puts in Portuguese and French and English for those in Spanish but he's showing you have to do this. And Ngugi made a similar point, and in that last book, he quotes Sheikh Anta Diop on this point and says, we have to do science in African languages. Y'all don't respect our languages. We created the sciences, so let's demonstrate not only that we can do it, but that we must do it. At the same time, he never disengages the West. And I think for me, and I don't know what you think about this, Haile, because the marker he puts down on what we must do and the way that he moved through the world and continued to engage, to me, there's something there. I don't want to say it's a dissonance, because many of us don't have the command of African languages. And so unlike film, where, like I say, it's easier to get that image directly so we can begin to think that way, to learn a language requires a level of effort that perhaps he just said, it's too important for me to get this message out for me to just go exclusively into these African languages and to take on all these institutions. And that's why I said in some ways he failed. But we're having this conversation in English, so I would consider this conversation a bit of a failure. But go ahead.
Actually, it provokes this issue, and we honestly have to discuss it.
Yes.
In my view, I think writing in your upbringing mother tongue and then leaving it for translation for the world to consume is one mindset. But every time you cook for white people, you always have to cook it for them in their language. And this is where I think we all failed. The African intellectual and the African diaspora intellectual, often we cook for those who would cherry pick our success, our fame. And it's directed, and in so doing, it goes to Armagh is my hero in literature. Armagh, because he doesn't believe you have the right to own his intellectual property. Right. Because that's his mortgaging a whole generation coming after you. So he stands his ground, even when we try to bring him at Howard. He said, there with you guys. I met him and I said to him, we will really guarantee respectful presentation of you. He didn't trust me. He agreed in person. He said to me, don't worry, Haile. And then when I got here and I got the financing with Carr and things and got back at him, he didn't even want to answer nothing. It was offered good. But he has, like, to me, what I like is, I think we are the most mortgaged, the intellectual property and artistic property of African people is the mortgaged billion-dollar capitalism that is in completely hand of white people. Whether it's Nicholas Brothers dancing, Lena Horne singing, Nina Simone doing this, you cannot give me Billie Holiday that's not owned by white people. And so for me, this is the disastrous, impact on our inability to redo our own work, because it's everything done is owned by them, and it helps them perpetuate their capitalism, but not necessarily the perpetuation of our own intellectual endeavor or cultural endeavor. So for me, the mortgaging of our intellectual instincts or productions is the disaster. So Armagh stands on that uniquely above everybody, hiding somewhere in Senegal, in some near ocean. He teaches young people. He built this amazing, modest building where he takes students to teach them how to write, and he's happy with that. And I looked at him and I said, what a choice to make. Yes. And I'm a guy who put 43 years of my life. This 43, I'll never forget it. I forget how old I am, but not 43 years of my payment in the plantation of Howard University. I'll never forget that because it's a lot of my life in there. And I see him in there with Cham. Cham was with me, and we were just sitting there baffled. What does it take for me not to have thought about this idea? It's amazing. So for me, I'm citing from Ngugi here, but I think in these writers that you mentioned, to me, Chinua Achebe, the traditional, established, Ngugi, the middle ground of caught in that tradition of publication, and then Arma. So for me, to me, I think the fact we don't, especially in film, we don't think in our own mother tongue. I mean, even within the diaspora, this is a possibility. There is African thought that insisted to exist for a long time. And it's dying now more because to a generation that has taken the abnormality of now as something normal, yes, makes them collaborators of the destruction of everything ever done, in my view.
I want to ask you about your conversations with him around film, and then another vector, another point that you all share in common. A comrade of yours, a protege, senior protege, Simbem, because I know he kind of grappled with Simbem too, in Ngugi that is.
Well, Simbem thinks of film as a night school arrangement with the audience. And a lot of people were just impressed with that power Simbem had with the public he built bit by bit, the audience he built coming out of literature and writing in French to his people who were not reading French, but writing it in film to his people who can see. Literally transformed Simbem into a world phenomenon. He's like to me, he's like my father in cinema. And when I met Ngugi the second time, the first time we met, he's very suspicious of me. And it was at Micheri's house. We were having dinner. She wanted us to meet like that. And I told him, I want to interview you, and I'm making a film, and da-da-da-da. He didn't trust me because I come from the West. So I understood that tension, and I told Micheri, he says, oh, he's not yet. When I said to him, we'll do this, he says, maybe he would say to me. Because he didn't trust me. Because I could be a CIA agent for Oprah. So anyway, it doesn't matter. The second time I have the upper hand when we meet in Zimbabwe. I don't know if that's the second time, although we've been in some conferences together. And especially one in London, I remember, where this language thing came up, and I'll share that with you if it helps. In Zimbabwe, at Harare, it was the Minister of Information, the former liberation movement becoming the present oppressive movement in Zimbabwe is in transaction. Mugabe's reactionary planet is in the making. And there was an African literature conference, and he was there. And it was very ironic and symbolic for me as a filmmaker. He said to me, he has applied to go to Sweden to study film or something to that effect, but he said, I would like to come to Howard to study under you, he says. I said, first, you're an intellectual mountain. There's no way I'm going to be your teacher. And I said, if you come to Howard, let me promise you, you'll be a teacher, and then we'll teach you technique. Cinema is just a camera, and this, you don't need a teacher. You'll just be independent, but you will need to spend some time. When we disagreed on time, he thought he would pick it up in few weeks. So I said to him, can I be a writer like Petals of Blood guy in 2 weeks or something? So we didn't communicate well. But what I noticed there was this whole thing of I should have the power Semben has to meet my people. And that is in the period of this whole let's write on our language time. So he felt if he climbed into cinema, if he grabbed cinema, he will then distribute his ideas better to the people straight without being midwifed from Eurocentric institutions. Yes. This is my suspicion. But the most interesting story I want to tell is I always tell my students here when we do workshop. How many people know House of Hunger from Zimbabwe, a book? House of Hunger, good. Oh man, I'm proud of you, sister. And you're from Ethiopia. That's what makes me proud of you. House of Hunger is a very important book written by Dambuzi, a Zimbabwean writer who wrote Mind Blast. And this book was big, like Richard Wright is big when he's big. And he returns to Zimbabwe in the messy time of Zimbabwe, kisses the ground, and then he is destroyed. This brilliant kid is destroyed. But what's so funny for me as a filmmaker, and very ironically, I was standing with Ngugi and some of these Kenyan writers, and to my left was Dambuzi with a liquor in his hand, a minister of information speaking. And I'm looking at this young-looking guy. You wouldn't think this is Dambuzi, the major guy, big winner in England stuff. So I'm looking, and then I hear the minister says, here in Zimbabwe, bragging, and Mugabe bragging. He goes, bullshit. Wow. And Ngugi and me were like this. I don't know if Ngugi knew him, but then I'm told that is the House of Hunger kid.
Wow.
Phew. So anyway, this was so symbolic for me as a filmmaker. I've written a play, and Mind Blast is my main character. And it's this kid who anxiously returned to Africa, to this the new promised land, promised revolutionary planet, and he died homeless in the streets of Zimbabwe, living in a carton-made house in cardboard houses. And to me, it showed me so much. Here's Ngugi, who Kenya could not destroy, okay? Who is made out of a different material, and who's a kid who was hijacked by England to Zimbabwe and made he's an amazing writer. So England didn't make him. But the colonial history of Zimbabwe just shows you, and as part of the destruction of this brilliant kid. Anyway, I don't know how I got there, but to me, Ngugi was standing there looking at this guy. Did he know I left? I didn't ask him or didn't know. I came back home, I'm telling my wife, I didn't know if Ngugi knew Dambuzi. I don't know if he knew. Because this is a kid, I'm telling you, by British white supremacist judgment. What is that, Booker something award?
Booker Award, yes.
This is a kid who goes to the award and destroys the plates and ruins white people's party. Read about him. He has a lot of books, brilliant writer. He's an amazing writer. He's a bullet, period. Those things that come once in the blue, shoot through past, making rays of light. That's the kind of kid he is. So I don't know if he knew what that meant to him, what story did he tell him. And I always wondered, did it come in his writing the way it came in my film, script writing, etc. So basically, I knew he wanted to make transition into cinema. Next time we meet in London, it's called Cinematic Ideas, is the name of the conference. And he was a speaker there. And I was the controversial speaker. I was not compared to, him, especially, what he proposed and what it meant to all the institutions of African writers is something else. Mine cannot come because in film, film is really very superficial. Even the conference would have a good headings, but the stomach is zero. So he comes from a deeper kind of world. But when it came to the discussion, I was talking about African cinema is not black people in it or black African language being spoken by the people. I'm saying there's a cinematic language we need to transcend into, from our culture to cinematic grammar or a cinema scripting. And it was very complicated for many people, including Ngugi, and it surprised me. So he came in with another professor from UCLA, confronting me in some situation. Haile, what do you mean by this? I said, Ngugi, you're the one who talks about this and that. And he was like left like this. But in my view, I was actually proposing almost the same in cinema, saying, unless the African filmmaker creates a cinematic translation of his or her psyche, we'll never know what African cinema is. Just the black people in it, African people talking, dancing, being in it, don't make it African cinema. If you don't believe me, go see Japanese cinema. Japanese cinema is clear. Whatever you think of it, even when they imitate the West, there's still a Japanese accent, cinematically speaking. Anyway, that's a diversion. I want us to go back to
I don't think we haven't left it at all, because a couple of things. When you talk about Armand being where he is, and then you all standing there in Zimbabwe, and y'all looking at this kid like, whoa, and then you thinking, what is he thinking? What is it? Ngugi thinking? When Ngugi took the job in California early on, he said, "I'm going to the center of the world." And he said, "What are you talking about? East Coast?" He says, "No, wherever you are is the center of the world." He was making that point, wherever you are doing that work. But I'm thinking about that in terms of his project, however you want to describe it. What is it? Wizard of the Crow, I guess, where he's giving an analysis and a critique of this post-colonial state and the puffed up bureaucracy stealing from everybody, the ruler, and then the people trying to go back and forth and basically be parasites on the folk. Not the same as, but maybe in the same broad direction as early Armagh, The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. This is what is going on. So there's the function of allowing people to see this is what's going on and naming it. And then much earlier than that, Matagari, where, as the story goes, the authorities are looking for Matagari. Who is this guy, man, for a minute? And they realize it's a fictional character. They looking for the guy. But so the state clearly understands that there's power in his language, there's power in his writing, and the people are picking up on it. But I think about what he said early on with his first novel, as he's writing, Weep Not Child, and it's published. And then he gives a copy to his mother and his people, and he says, she couldn't read it, but she asked me, "Are you satisfied? Is this what you?" Yes, this is what. Yes. And then they set up a book signing, and he says the people come to have their book signed. He says, I never imagined that people would come for me to sign my name in a book that I wrote for them. But these are the people he is literally trying to represent to the world and also project outward to the world as part of them. But that tension is there. It's not film, it's literature, and who has the money for it, and who can read and who can't. His mother couldn't read it. But I'm saying all that in the context of this. How important do you think it is to try to get a sense of scale, of critical mass? Whereas a book like Matagari upsets the government. A novel many years later, The Wizard of the Crow, kind of a critique that's all important, but things that will probably be more discussed in places like a university setting or a place like this than it would be among the people who are doing the living and dying. And then I'll end with this, because the question of language for him, of course, this is the central piece with Ngugi, as we know, one of no more essential piece. But I'm thinking about something he wrote in chapter 3 of Something Torn and New, where he talks about the question of language and how the West created itself and the function of translation. You know, he's always talking about translation. One of the reasons he said he went out there to California was they set up a translation institute. He says translation is so important for us to get involved in. Of course, that's what Armand is doing, but he ain't got no grants. He ain't doing, we're going to do translations, but I'm going to do it here with these people. So he says, the two salient features of the European Renaissance are discovery and recovery. By discovery, I don't mean the voyages of exploration and conquest or the creation of colonial otherness, but rather Europe's encounter with its own languages. Eric Arbach describes the European Renaissance as, quote, the movement through which the literary languages of the various European peoples finally shook off Latin, end quote. Before this, Latin had occupied a position not too dissimilar from that occupied by European languages in Africa today. Quote, it was virtually the sole vehicle of intellectual life and written communications, a foreign language that had to be learned, cut off from spoken language. He goes on to talk about the fact that the Europeans began to learn each other's languages and form this kind of sense of pride and self in their, what we might call vernacular, indigenous languages. And then ultimately, though, they backmap an importance to Greece and Rome, and they invent a Greece and Rome ultimately to give themselves an anchor. When Sheikh Anta Diop says, well, Egypt is to Africa as Greece is to Rome, I can understand that conceptually, but in terms of critical mass, in Ngugi trying to, and he goes on to talk about this, the importance of translation for African people, trying to get us to respect our languages. And not only respect them, but use them. And not only use them, but stand in them to survey the world and engage the world. How important is it to reach a critical mass to be able to push back as Africans? You can do it with film. People watch Sankofa or they watch any of your projects, and it doesn't matter who's watching it. As African people, we certainly feel that resonating and we feel that resonant chord tapping in. And as you say, in Ngugi trying to make a jump to cinema, in part maybe is because in part he's saying, as much as I value what I'm writing, as much as I stand 10 toes down on this, it's not fast enough. It's not, we got to create a critical mass at some point because we can't do what the Europeans did. That was done 500 years ago and they got a foundation. But in order to get them out of our minds and get them out of our mouths, we got to create a delivery system that's going to allow us to create some form of escape velocity that'll enable us to do it. He needs it to be language, but is it even possible in literature? And then we're going to open it up.
I will take it in film because it's something I've agonized for quite some time now. And I think to me, the critical mass is an abstract notion. It doesn't exist. The critical mass is the making of Europe. And it means it's a pornographic critical mass. It's a people that are addicted to pornographic materialist discourse. And those people are not yours. To me, anybody you build quantitatively from ABCD are the only people you can count on. That's why all revolutionaries are kaput, in my view. I mean, there's no declaration of change from Malcolm to Cabral to Fidel Castro, but look at the world back into its Hollywood formation. So the thinking, fighting in the brain, in the thought system of human beings is what we did not take seriously. So to me, I make films now knowing this critical mass is not my making. And I know what they're addicted, what they want to see. I don't want to give them that.
Right.
So to me, to tell my story, I have to say where I am now. I'm finishing a film that has taken me 30 years, 2 films. I'm finishing them, knowing this critical mass is not the one that would turn up. It's the descendants, the skipped generation, the descendants of this critical mass that's been colonized for 100 years.
Yes.
When it dies off, there is a generation that pops up or erupts. My hope is that's when my film will make maybe sense. It's not to this one. Because if this critical mass was my objective, I'd make them a pornographic movie using their own children in a very violent way. And that's where we are. And we don't admit that we fantasize, romanticize. So to me, especially the African intellectual, here and there, in the diaspora, we have a phantom claim to the critical mass. Masses of people are colonized people. You know what they want if you do your homework. They will admire you to say, oh, Haile Gerima, the first pornographic film with black people making love in the bathtub. Oh my goodness, what a great achievement. Isn't that what we're doing now? Yes. To all the obscene expression in a time of war, in a time of homelessness, in a time that a president is eliminating openly black people, inviting white people from South Africa. Are we dead people? Or where are we? What is this critical mass? So for me, I think, to me, black people's fantasy has always been claiming the people they never built.
Right.
You built it brick by brick. That's your people. To me, quantitatively built a qualitative public is your own work, hard work. So to me, to not work hard, build from A, B, C, D, but take a built audience, I have to give them to the things they're addicted to. So to me, I think in general, the intellectual production of the African people, we have this false claim of our people. In fact, we should not trust if they turn up in masses to your stuff.
Don't trust
them. Don't trust them because they're going to revert back to where they're conditioned. That's what we're living now. We hate to admit it. We're living now where we have reverted back to plantation subjects, occupied people by cell phone, by many things. We're occupied people. And our children are occupied people. You had to fight like hell to get your kids disengaged from the phone and watch you and say, oh, you have wrinkles, you've grown wrinkles now. Instead of saying, when did you get that old? Yeah, you've been watching the cell phone, your girlfriend, and not me, my son. So to me, there's a complicated situation that I hope I didn't cumbersome away from Ngugi, but to me, this is where I have arrived now.
I got you.
Yeah.
That's very proud. Can we
That's
start
because
opening?
you asked me. Yeah,
No.
We're going to open
That's
in the
all.
back.
Smart.
Microphone in the back.
You got a microphone. You want to?
There's a brother in the back that we know is a household material from 100 years ago wants to speak. Can you give him a
You got it,
mic,
Jordan.
please?
Thank you, brother. Hey, quiet. They're recording.
Oh, they are.
These guys lieutenants.
Yeah, respect
All right.
the house
Make it.
rules.
Good afternoon, good
Thank
evening,
you.
rather, and thanks for
Good
everybody
evening,
here. I want to say two things. Number one, Haile's insight about trying to create a cinematographic language is exactly what Ngugi was talking about when he said our culture is embedded in our language. It's what you learn when you talk to a Zulu who is knowledgeable and says this thing about the way they use Ubuntu is wrong. It actually implies these other things, and Tutu anglicized it to make it comfortable and utilitarian. So, and Ngugi is still right, and let's not veer from him. When, in a very pragmatic, practical way, the issue is, do people in various countries encourage their children to learn how to write in their own language? Okay, do they do that? And in a very, in a very just practical way, it would not take anything for people at the University of Nairobi or Kenyatta to say, we want you to write your senior thesis in your own language first, or in Kiswahili, which is the lingua franca, and then we will translate into English, or you can translate into English. This is the way you have to rehearse it. So this is no longer any pie in the sky. Now the tension between this business of using English or not, so more universal languages, and Ngugi talks about that when he talks about the poet Yeats and the Irish struggling with this same question. Well, should we write in our own Gaelic or da-da-da-da-da? And we see the same debate between Chimamanda Adichie, who lives right out here in PG County, and Ngugi. Chimamanda says, no, this English is mine. Right. And Ngugi says, no, it's not yours. No. So, but the thing is that we shall shed no blood over that discussion. That is not worth one African's life. Never. So, Ngugi is correct. And I'm going to say something that I know about children in school in Kenya. And I know that they will follow a certain curriculum. There are different curriculums, especially if they're in private schools. If you can afford this or afford that, you get the Cambridge curriculum, you get the Pearson curriculum, whatever. It's the school itself that will say, oh, we're going to also make you take Kiswahili, although that may not be in one of the other curricula. But even though they do that, and I know factually for a fact that in some places they do, they don't require the kids to get to literary level of Kiswahili. I don't know what it's like in Ethiopia. I suspect that many Ethiopians can write in Amharic and write well. I mean, I don't know. I think it's easier there. I am saying, and Ngugi is still right, the point is to use African languages, to use them, and yes, you can translate them, but there is no African literature or orature if it's written in a European language, period. Okay, and the last thing I'd like to say is this. You talked about science and using African languages for science. I have to give you an anecdote. At the meetings of the Association of Biological Anthropologists last year, I met a young lady who had no accent. She was from Uganda. She spoke Kinyarwanda. And I said, is there an anatomy book or an osteology book in your language? She said, no. Okay, because this is the thing that I'm on about. I would love to see my son write a Kiswahili book, an osteology book in Kiswahili. It is not that hard. So anyway, with the young lady who's a PhD candidate, she's very smart. She said, oh, well, we don't have the language to do this. And this is what I said to her. I said, you have had domesticated cattle for 2,000 years, right? Yes. I said, and you butcher those cattle, right? Yes. And when you butcher the upper hindquarter, you have a name for that, right? Yes. You have a name for the muscle that's there, right? Yes. You have a name for the... And then the light went off. We do have the language. Mm-hmm. We do have the terms. Mm-hmm. It's there. It's just the political will, the philosophical will, the very same thing that Ngugi laid his life out for. Yes, he went back and wrote English because that's okay. I bet his first manuscript, I still bet the first copy of Secure the Base, for example, a more recent book, was written in Kikuyu first. Yeah. I don't know that, but it wouldn't shock me if all the notes were. And then he said, well, I got to give it to this publisher, so I'll translate it into English. At least he had the wherewithal to let himself translate it into English. That's a very important thing. And there are many of the African universities that have, going back to the 30s, senior theses, honors theses, on their shelves, in their libraries, or in storage someplace, things that were done by their own students. That is a mother lode of documents. I think some were written in local languages, some weren't. But the point is, you have this lifelong project. So we are not dead, and Ngugi's project is still right. No, I'm not going to learn Kiswahili, but my children do. And maybe they'll learn Kipsigis too, who knows. The point is that it is a political stance. It's an educational stance. And it's something that's a value stance. You have to believe that buried, encoded in those languages is a worldview that you will not find in Anglo-Saxon. And in fact, King Alfred the Great, the only reason we're speaking English right now is because King Alfred in 800 AD or whenever it was, translated the Latin Bible into English and said the upper class can read it. Had he not done that, if you look at the timelines for the rest of Europe and the struggles over Latin and why, you go back to a certain century and all this stuff is in Latin, Alfred translated that book, the Bible, whatever version, into Anglo-Saxon early. So I'm done. Okay. But again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your insight into Nana Ngugi wa Thiong'o. I think first and foremost, something I wanted to also point out is Nana Ngugi wa Thiong'o also says something, which is that I lost it. To quote him, he's like, if you know all the languages of the world and you don't know your mother tongue or the language of your culture, that is enslavement. But if you know your mother tongue or the language of your culture and add all the languages of the world to it, that is empowerment. So I wanted to highlight that, to say that he wasn't like, okay, let's just use our languages and then let's forget about, colonial tongues, but also it was important that we know our mother tongues, which I think was like central to Nana Ngugi wa Thiong'o's thesis. But in honoring him, I want to cast my mind back. The first time I engaged with Nana Ngugi wa Thiong'o was the book Wizard of the Crow, which when I got, I never put down, 800 pages long. And I want to give like big shout outs to my brother, who is also like a writer in Ghana, Moshood, because he lent me a copy of his book and I was able to engage. And I found the work so profound. I mean, Baba Greg has already shared like insight into that. And also moving on.
Talk some more about it, because I just evoked it, brother. Go ahead.
No, yeah, you've shared. I mean, about like the corruption happening. He sets it in post-independence Kenya, and then there is like all of these like corruption happening, which also is very similar to what Papa Ikoyama writes in his book, The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. So reading those two like side by side, really profound. But coming to like Howard, I remember in the Department of African Studies, we had a class, one of the first classes, Language, Literature and the Arts, and that was taught by Obimfo Nanacham. And I remember he gave us an essay to write. In the class also, I would usually come from the angle of Nana Ngugi wa Thiong'o, because languages are important. Of course, other people see it differently. So I remember Dr. Cham gave us an essay to write, which was on monolingualism and bilingualism and its relation to development in Africa. To be honest, I wasn't really interested in that argument. What I was really interested in was that, can we use our native languages inside of higher education? So what I did, I gave myself a task of writing in my native tongue, which was in Tree, and I translated it, into English. Then I went ahead and used Google Translate to translate, and then left it at the appendix and made arguments for Dr. Cham as to why we can include our languages inside of higher education. The beautiful thing that Dr. Cham did was that he returned his comment on the work in my language, which was in Tree. That was amazing. It was beautiful because you could see that he took the time to type out his thoughts, go into Google Translate, and let Google translate into my language, and he sent me his feedback inside of. So at that point, it was okay, this argument is going somewhere, and that's something that I really cherish. And moving on, also took a film class once again with Dr. Cham, and here also I engaged Nana Ngugi wa Thiong'o's thoughts in another work where I was looking at something torn and new, and I was looking at in relation to the filmmaker from Ghana, Ejakwa Ansa, his film Heritage Africa. So I was looking at the two side by side, and here also I want to give a big shout out to Kamal, because I came in the store one time, and then Kamal, I think that was the last copy of that book, Something Torn and New, and then he said he was going to read it, but graciously he sold it to me and that allowed me to engage that work. So please permit me to just read a portion of the work, what I wrote also for Dr. Cham's class, if you'd permit me, please. Of loss and return. So Nana Ngugi wa Thiong'o invites us to see the dismemberment of Africa as occurring in two stages. The first was the division of the African personhood into two halves because of enslavement, the continent and the diaspora. Here, for kith and kin forcibly removed from the land, Tate wa Thiong'o notes that a systematic program eliminated their memory of Africa. Not only were they stripped from their motherland, but they were also stripped from their very sovereign being. Where there has been a systematic program towards dismemberment, there are attempts now at systematic programs of return, which will be discussed later. Tatewa Thiong'o sees the second act of dismemberment as the consequence of the Berlin Conference in 1884 and its violent fragmentation of the land and its people. Here also was a calculated program to strip Africans from the land. Its consequences are what we see in the film Heritage Africa. Heritage Africa, released in 1988, is the second feature film of Ghana's filmmaker, Ejakwa Ansa. Set in the 1940s colonial Gold Coast, the film dramatizes the violent effect of colonization, showing how it alienates the colonized from her culture, values, and land. In this case, we are led to contemplate the disastrous effects of the colonial mentality through the protagonist, Kwesi Arthur Bosomefi, or as he would have us call him, Quincy Arthur Bosomfield. Bosomefi, having successfully navigated the colonial education and workforce, goes on to become the first Native District Commissioner of Accra. He is at this point a few steps close to the attainment of his recurring dream, where he gets to shake the hand of the King of England and possibly be knighted by the King. We are reminded here of Fanon's analysis of the colonized in his work, The Wretched of the Earth. Reflecting on how the colonized seeks to integrate into the colonial structures, he writes, "The look that the native turns on the settler's town is a look of lust, a look of envy. It expresses his dreams of possession, all manner of possession. To sit at the settler's table, to sleep in the settler's bed, with his wife, if possible. The colonized man is an envious man," end quote. Heritage Africa dramatizes this envy and dreams of possession so profoundly that we are forced to reckon with what cultural heritage we are sacrificing on the altar of integration. Is the settler's table worth the discarding of our mothers? Is the settler's bed worth the erasure of our names? And is the settler's wife worth our family? All of which Bosomefi sacrifices as he comfortably settles into his new role as district commissioner and into the European bungalows not intended for natives. Towards the end, Bosomefi gives away his ancestral heirloom, comes into a realization of the deep loss of self. He comes to see himself, and rightfully so, as a victim and intended casualty of the colonial system. Quote, "I feel like an alien in an ancestral home," Bosomefi proclaims. But colonization was not just an act of cruel dismemberment. For the natives, it was also an act of humiliation to ensure that we could no longer identify with our ancestral heirloom. And so, like our protagonist in Heritage Africa, indigenous names were discarded. That which was not discarded was anglicized. This was a symbolic act of surrender to a humiliation faced. And so, Bosomefi asked a potent question worthy of our reflection. What is in a name? Nana Fukiao, relaying to readers information passed to him during his initiation amongst the Bakongo, informs us that names like that of Batiero, whom I had brought in the introduction, are vessels for holding the power of the destiny of a person. Your name is the real you, he says. It is a moving power, your moving power towards success. It is a socially given power to you that no one can prevent. Your name is the most important word that you will ever know in your lifetime. As such, it is one of the most important keys to life. It has radiating power in you and around you. When it is called, it produces waves and radiations in and around you because it represents the content of your potential package of kinetic power. There is magnetization between you and name when it is spoken, end quote. Thus, the loss of ancestral names is the loss of ancestral power. To replace African names with European ones is akin to Bosomefi handing his family heirloom to the governor, which was sent onward to a museum in Europe. For Tatewa Thiong'o, to incorporate European names is to be branded with a European memory. A loss here is to be mourned, the loss of our memory. Following the loss of memory comes the loss of self. The loss of self, Busumefi suffers, is akin to our contemporary situation in Africa. For one can ask, 36 years after the movie was released, why do we continue to incur colonial degradation upon ourselves? Take, for instance, in 2018, the Ghanaian Registrar for Birth and Death, Mr. John Agbeko, decreed that certain local titles added to names like Nanani Togbe would be banned from name certificates. However, their English counterparts were to be allowed. Moreover, for him, due to Ghana being an English-speaking country, his English name had to be the first name and could not be the middle name. This pronouncement was met with backlash that it had to be rescinded. And also, we have to keep in mind also that Nigeria recently just...
My brother.
I'll pause here. Yeah, also Nigeria just recently dishonored...
Excuse me,
Okay.
you have taken... I wish I knew you had written on this. I would have had you on the stage, do introduction reading. Seriously, it's a very extensive intellectual production. I wish we knew about that.
Okay.
I wish you informed us. I think the presentation, the format is a little bit of a problem. Could microphone go here, please?
Thank you.
Thank you. Now he's teaching tree now over at Howard. He's teaching the tree.
Yeah,
language
make
here
sure
now.
you don't do it in a British accent.
He doesn't have.
Okay, I just want to say thank you
The Nigerians.
Graham Dr. Carr, as always. Two questions. Can you break down the meaning of his name, and also if you can deconstruct the American Revolution that was just aired on PBS this week in terms of Ngugi wa Thiong'o's analysis that Ken Burns, it was aired on PBS all this week. Thank you.
Well, the Wathiango is his son, right? Son of, right? Yeah. Yeah, son of Thiong'o. So,
You have more questions there?
So just to back up to Alvin's question, he actually took my question. So I was just going to say, in honoring Ngugi wa Thiong'o's name, if you could please share the meaning of his name.
I think that's the extent of my language facility in it, just knowing the Wa. Like his son, like one of his sons is named, two of the 10 children I know are Wa and Ngugi. But, it's like, I guess in Arabic, Bin Laden, so to speak, son of, or, but I don't know if anybody else, any Kiswahili speakers in here who would know the literal meaning of the name, or Gikuyu, I suppose, not Kiswahili, of Ngugi,
You mentioned James at one time.
Well, yeah, that was his quote unquote slave name. Yeah, I shouldn't say slave. Yeah, slave, missionary, Christian. That's all the same thing, right? No, I shouldn't say that. That's not fair. I shouldn't say that. No, but it's interesting when Ngugi is. Well, does anybody know Gikuyu? Any Gikuyu speakers in Ngugi? Huh?
Okay.
No, I don't know that it. I don't know that it
Here
might
it is.
not.
Here
It
it
may
is.
not be just his name, right? It didn't translate. So I don't know. So that's all right.
Hold up.
Yeah.
Hold up. That's what this is for.
No.
This is for
AI. We gotta have
Ngugi-
African
Man,
intelligence, not artificial intelligence.
And Ngugi is a Kikuyu name that signifies growth, prosperity, and continuity, and it means to add or to increase. And the Wa
Okay.
Thiong'o translates to son of Thiong'o.
Son of Thiong'o. Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah. Well, I'll just say very quickly about Ken Burns is, Ken Burns is America's historian, and I know you talked to Ken Burns before, right? No. You never talked with him? That's unfortunate. No, I raised it because Burns, I think, I'm trying to think about this in terms of Ngugi. I think the fight over memory, remembering, is a constant fight, even in something torn and new. And Ngugi thinking about, and to the point where I even started saying to myself, I'm gonna stop saying diaspora and just talk about global Africa. the African world, realizing the continent is the center, but the African world rather than the diaspora. Because as he said, and as we just heard, the dismemberment of Africa begins with separating the continent from the diaspora, making those two things. And then, of course, that sets up the diaspora wars. That sets up the whole question of cultural appropriation. No. We're Africans. Different experiences, but there's something that connects us that, and I hate to evoke him, but I will, because I think about now the 7th Pan-African Congress. Many people know more about that in here than I do. But somebody like Maulana Karenga saying that, the Africans of the United States shouldn't play what he would say. This is a direct quote. We won't play junior partner to continental Africans when it comes to grappling with this question of culture. I think it's a little harsh, but underneath that is the idea that wherever we are in the world, we African people. So there's got to be a way to come together on that while privileging the fact that the foundation, and as you said, Prof, secure the base. He's saying that you got to have a foundation out of which you grow. Now, Ken Burns, I admire Burns for this. Ken Burns understands that the criminal enterprise called United States of America doesn't have a foundation. Let me not say that. He understands that it does have a foundation, but that foundation is in the criminal enterprise itself. It's in an imaginary construct called Europe. The same thing that Ngugi is grappling with in Something Torn and New. Y'all made up a self. You made it up by sharing your languages with each other and then back mapping to a degree your common understandings into a shared inheritance in an invention called Greco-Roman kind of. The Greeks are not the Romans, and the Greeks and the Romans are not the Hungarians. They're not the British. They're not the Gauls. But y'all made that up. Fine, respect. And ironically hijacked in many ways the Muslims, because it's the Arabs that translate and the Africans that translate a lot of that stuff from Greece and Rome into the contemporary moment to allow them to even put their little pockmarked village-based vernacular languages, connect them to Greece and Rome. It's the Muslims, the Moors, for 8 centuries. Now, Burns is hard at work in inventing an American national identity. Every documentary he has is about that. But because I think he is honest in trying to do that, inexorably, if you measure him from all the arc of his stuff, he puts black people at the center of a great deal of it. Whether it be baseball, whether it be jazz, even the stuff like national parks, because Charles Young is in there, or for that matter, the stuff he did on Roosevelt, Thomas Jefferson, but each film he makes, he gets a little bit closer to the reality. And the American Revolution is the closest he's gotten to the reality. And the reality is that this funky criminal enterprise has no identity. And in this documentary, and in the companion volume he did with his brother, he always does a big volume along with it. He begins that first section of the 12-hour documentary with the indigenous people. And saying, these people came over here, they act like we don't respect the land, but we know very well. And then he basically says, y'all hijacked the concept of dispute resolution from the so-called civilized tribes in the Northeast. And he got Benjamin Franklin talking about that. And then he basically, now I'll end with this, he narrates American history, U.S. history, as a civil war. They were fighting each other. And they have never stopped fighting each other. In Ngugi, I think, in contrast, even though he quotes Sheikh Anta Diop in that last book of essays I was mentioning, and let me just ask, maybe I won't say because I don't want to overburden and Ngugi this, but I will ask, is it possible to come up with some form of African foundation kind of common identity, even in all our great differences, that could have us come together, a cultural glue of sorts? Maybe that's a political project and maybe it's not necessary. That would allow us to then move with our common interests in kind of anchoring whatever we do in the world, even as we will differ from each other. Is that even something to aspire to? Because that's what Burns is trying to do with the United States. But I think he's increasingly begun to understand that that's impossible.
Well, let me say this. I think the thing I would add, I don't know if it can help, is this too. I want to come back to Ken Burns because I said he's a cracker, not because he's a cracker. It is because of how he uses cinema to lacerate people who are not in power of that interpretation. Still, he is the interpreter of that history. And the power he has is sometimes underestimated because we do not know laceration that comes out of visual power. You know, our subjugation comes from over laceration and whipping. Not that, physical whip, but, a film could be a cracker. Cracking. You can crack with thunder and lightning, with a whip, or with cinema lighting. Lightning. So that's why I said. Two, I want to come back to your question. The second part is, he is one guy who's manufacturing even what Obama awkwardly kept pushing, the American exceptionalism. That's right. That's true. To me, I think the new film, I don't have to watch it because I know how to read his head. I watch the film without watching it because I know the source of it. But I would say, those of you who see that, you need to read Gabriel Prosser's story because he's the first enslaved African who challenged the so-called American Revolution. And I think the contradiction of that is what is left out underneath the subtext. To me, the whole idea, there has never been this is his belief, there's never been experiment such a country like America with all its sinfulness. To me, that's a dangerous Jeffersonian idea that whites could not dislodge from. Because the biggest problem is whites refuse to change. Even now, as they dismantle their own power, they refuse to change and be humbled by the history that we all inherit. So for me, give me a break. On jazz, for example, on jazz, read Baraka and tell me if that movie says anything about jazz. Why is Baraka left? He is the authority, in my view, premier authority on jazz is Baraka. But he's left out of the movie. Every stupid, intelligent, dumb person is in the movie, black or white. But Baraka missing. When I watched jazz, I was waiting for Baraka to come and blow this shit out because he never takes jazz, he never makes jazz toothless. Never in his writing. Damn. He gives context and also the tooth that is very spiritual and revolutionary. Otherwise, if jazz is taken as toothless entertainment, it's for wiggling butts. And that's a misrepresentation of jazz. So for me, check out Baraka. About 10 books you will find him on jazz. The most revolutionary, thoughtful analysis of jazz as a whole, individual jazz makers in general. And then tell me I'm wrong on my take on Ken Burns is a cinematic cracker, whipper. No. He whips us through the power of cinema because white liberals empower him with exuberant money, which is very Hollywoodian for a documentary. Absolutely. That's all I say. The other thing, what you said about umbrella, we can come, I think Pan-Africanism lends that. Pan-Africanism is a quilt out of small particularities, respecting our own hamlets, individual, community, and hamlets within a Pan-African umbrella. Because Pan-Africanism is a revolutionary idea that is not yet taken seriously. But still, it doesn't mean we will lose our individual community and people's language and identity. Yes. But Pan-Africanism as an umbrella, as a revolutionary concept, came up by Africans from the diaspora and Africans from Africa. Yes. It has not yet given its debut in the magnitude it is. That's what I would say.
That's a good point. And he makes that point in something new. He said it came from outside of Africa. No, yeah. Okay.
This here, microphone here. My brother here first. This brother has been on it.
Thank you, bro. Okay, first I want to ask, do I got permission from my elders to speak?
Go ahead, bro.
Okay, give thanks. I'm going to sit down because there's folks back here. But I want to say, first, thank you for introducing me to him. Thank you for making your film. You inspired me heavily. I'm from Nashville, so the connection that we beat y'all this year at homecoming. Yeah,
Beat who?
Howard,
We?
TSU.
I went to Tennessee State, bro.
We beat y'all. Everybody else.
We did beat Howard.
Yeah, that
no
part.
question. I'm about to say, what were
hey.
you talking about?
I didn't
Don't
know.
worry.
It was too
It's all
French for
love.
me.
But he knows, like,
Okay, I want to say a point about
it's one big HBCU with 107 locations, so I never lose any football contest or anybody. Yeah, go ahead.
I love y'all. Okay, I want to speak on the language piece. It made me think about the Phoenicians, right? And so in thinking about Spain and Al-Andalus and the legacy of the Phoenicians and the root of these letters that we use, right? The English alphabet is really rooted in Latin, is rooted in Greek, which comes from the Phoenicians, and the identity of those people is important. So when we talk about, can we really use African languages to create a foundational science or liturgy for enduring scholarship, is it really possible when we're using the quote-unquote English language? I say yes, because it's rooted in copper-colored Phoenicians, right? And then I also want to bring up the presence of indigenous Americans. Thank you, Juan, for connecting me with the Seminoles in Texas and the Maroons, which has inspired me more to investigate the presence of dark-skinned, nappy-headed people that build mounds or earth pyramids, and we find phonetic stelae in those. We find rocks with Phoenician and copper artifacts. And so I think it's very important that not only are we disconnecting with a colonial heritage, we're reconnecting with a deeper melanin wealthy heritage that goes before the Anglo-Saxons and so forth. So I think it's important that not only are we're rebuilding a liturgy, but we are reconnecting with the DNA and connecting with this indigenous culture that pervades continents, that precedes ideas of Pan-Africanism or ideas of what even Africa is, because before these lines were drawn, ultimately I'm asking the question, is it important that we do highlight some of the elder roots that we know create this English language, quote unquote?
Well, I don't know if it's going to connect to that, but I hope you can. One other thing I'm reminded of
Is this
issue
thing?
of language. The issue of language is really, even earlier people mentioned Ethiopia. Ethiopians speak Amharic, write Amharic, but they teach in English, meaning the mindset is English. So to me, this is where we lose the war. You look black, but it doesn't mean your brain is black. This is where we lose the war. And this is how black people became black power. Your fist and black skin, was it just the prerequisite? You're black, you're okay. You happen to be FBI inside. Okay? So to me, the thing I said about him earlier, about his teaching method, defies this Eurocentric, authoritarian, Pope lecture of vertical education. The minute you say, excuse me, it's not really, it's also in the back. The minute you say African mind thought, I don't think it's the physical language we know that's going to answer. I don't think it's the physicalness of Africa. I think the mentality of Africa, even Ethiopia, that speaks English, local Amharic, thinks in English. Teach Amharic teachers think in English. In other words, it's a deeper problem of our colonial state. We think it's the physical manifestation. It's not. It's not in the mouth speaking Kiswahili. It's not in the mouth Wolof being spoken or Amharic. The brain where it originates is already Anglo-Saxonized or Portuguesized. This is where we miss the battle. The thinking is where we are colonized, is in our thought system. It doesn't matter how much we brag. The most bombastic revolutionaries are black people. Loud and can't believe it. And then they fizzle out. But the issue is that if your thought system, like when I said he teaches his students, one of the things that I admire that I myself wanted to implement is African culture is circular. The minute you think like theater like this, spectators and performers, we enter that orbit of the Greek, Roman, Anglo-Saxon, Spanish thought system. The educational system at Howard is not the problem of the fact it's in English. It is the physicalization of knowledge or transmission of knowledge is from Pope. Teachers know, students come without anything, and in their brain you pour into knowledge into them. This is where the whole problem keeps going back. Howard is like, you can never make an impact ongoing to say, you the teacher first should go through change and transformation. Yes, you should not be near students because your thought system is occupied by colonial mind thought. So your skin is not a license. All the black, every year we have the, new black stuff. It don't cover, the inside is the problem. Otherwise, we tried everything physical. Even Black Lives Matters, what's tried, I'm a man. What do you think I'm a man is? It's about Black Lives Matters. The fashion show changed, the Sisters and Brothers movement changes, and the offering of capitalism, the kind of underwear to wear for that day of demonstration has changed. It's a new underwear, a new tennis shoes that says, I'm black, I love black. Most people I don't trust is who loudmouth they love black people. If you loudmouth it, I don't trust you. This is fundamental the way I got from my father. From my father, I don't trust you for your loud stuff. When I was a student at UCLA, the fist, I challenged the fist. I made a short film. When the fist opens, it's a drug dealer. I had a whole black power shit. I was angry at all this. Everybody's past was, you be with a white girl in the gypsy wagon, turns around. How you doing, brother? Eh? And I said, loosen that hand. What is in it? Yeah, a drug dealer. You're selling cocaine, etc. So to me, I think this physicalization, the way we know this physical stuff is obvious. What's killing us is the inner work they're doing. This surgery, laceration our brain, inner brain, they have done is the problem because it affects our instincts. Every black person want to do good like me or you, but the minute he extends or she extends her hand, she does damage. Why? Because the brain is not changed. So to me, this physical discussion doesn't take, I don't know, this is where I say it's not enough that we speak our language. Because language is physical. What is the thought system that produces that mouth? What is coming out and where is the headquarter? This is where we refuse to make revolution. A guerrilla warfare here, inside, has to take place first. Before you become a missionary, a black leader, call demonstration, tell black people what they are not, what they are. Check this out first. Who are you? But to me, we continue to regurgitate, perpetuate our own oppression because none of it means sincere, because we don't take personal change. It's easy in the black community, a very oppressed community, to be a messiah suddenly. Because we're looking for somebody. It's easy for us to embrace you because we're hungered of leaders. But goddamn, sometimes maybe they will manufacture a black person, send it to us. Now with AI, we can make a lot of movie. I'm finished with that.
Let me just continue in this vein, right? And no question. And then we won't get you. Okay. So
Sorry.
No. This is perfect. No, it's perfect. No, really, because I'm thinking about when you talk about going back as far as we can, seeing the roots. The time and space question evoked again. When you said that the culture is circular, how important are origins?
So the teaching method.
The teaching method. Oh yeah, definitely my teaching method. Oh no, that's true.
With your position.
No, that's no question.
Vertical power.
That actually makes a lot more. Thank you, because that's what we do.
That's why I like you.
No, that's why. 43 years. Everything I saw, and in fact, the students now, they asked me a couple of weeks ago, when are we going to see after winter? Because you're not be talking about all day. Every generation wants to see this same. And I think about the fact that you made that with your students. Every film we see that, and even Sankofa, these are people who had come through you, and as you pour into them, they pour into you. It's circular. You're absolutely right. So all I'm doing is modeling you. No, that's true. All we are. No, absolutely. Thank you, Jordan. No, it's true. No. But I'm saying that in this context, there's something there that precedes the conversations we're having. And when you talk about those roots, if we're taking it out of a linear kind of Western framing, which in terms of hierarchy might echo with this question of the Pope pouring into people that lecture model, or in the context of history, whatever is oldest is best, or whatever is newest is best. And you talk about, and Ngugi saying he wants to decolonize modernity. I want to disabuse us of the notion that the thing that has come latest in time is better than the stuff that came before. That whole linear notion, this constant ascent of human society. But what you raised, though, I think raises a very challenging thing. I'm a student of Theophilo Obenga, too, the linguist, the Egyptologist. Well, the language, man. The Egyptologists digging around. They don't necessarily can't read the stuff, but they dig, as you know. But watching Obenga work, reading how Ngugi works, watching Haile Gerima make film and edit and then match the sound and then say, okay, this color, okay, man. And think, man, I see why it takes decades, because this ain't nothing you can learn quick. And I'm sorry, Ngugi thought he could do it in 2 weeks. But, I mean, no, because it speaks to this very important issue. And Ngugi is engaged in a level of dialogue and in a level of observation and witness and thinking that is incremental. It has to be done over long arcs of time. Somebody like Pharrell Williams, circus clown. No, I'm saying that for this reason. I'm being provocative for this reason. He too has an incredible craft. He's very good at his craft, whether it be sound, whether it be imagery. But in that work, he's tapping into a lower common denominator that produced those roots. So that's why you say in the wrong hands, it becomes weaponized ignorance, because you're tapping into a genius and intelligence that is the Gerima teaching style, or my teaching style, or those who taught us. It's circular. And once you put that rhythm in it, that beat in it, that's the African part. And you don't have to document where it came from, because it never stopped being, it never stopped becoming. But when you combine that with a lack of study, when you combine that with a lack of focused attention on how to now see the connections and have people understand the connections, that's how you end up with a Pharrell as opposed to an Ngugi. Go ahead.
Demystify knowledge.
Yes.
To empower, to say you too can arrive where
You
I have
too.
arrived.
Right. You
That's
gotta
a different
model
way
it.
of teaching.
That's exactly right.
That's a different way of teaching.
That's exactly
Now let me
right.
say something, since it's also introduced. When Ethiopia defeated the Italians in 1939 or 38, 37, 39, when they actually defeated them with guerrilla warfare, in almost 5-6 years guerrilla warfare, Ethiopians defeated the Italians. Then the British came insidiously, who from the outset in the League of Nations sold Ethiopia to the Italians. They came in in solidarity as so-called, from their eye, liberators of Ethiopians have liberated their country, but the British came as liberators. And then they tried to run Ethiopia, saying if we allow Ethiopia to run again independently, other Africans will be a problem. Our colony in Sudan, Nigeria, etc. So the Ethiopian elite, very interestingly, Haile Selassie's period, the elite said, no, you're not staying, you gotta go. And the Ethiopians got tricked in this process through the American Roosevelt's mechanism. And that is, okay, Ethiopia still needs to be civilized. Ethiopia still needs to be modernized. And England will help her be modernized. And they took over the judiciary. They took over the education. First, the educational infrastructure. Look at it carefully. The educational. Why? Because they want to mold the future Ethiopians. So they brought teachers from Sudan, their own colony that they have molded already. They brought teachers from Egypt that they have molded already. Okay? And what we saw was we spoke Amharic confidently. We wrote in Amharic. We have newspaper in Amharic, radio station in Amharic. But with this British intrigue, we created a generation of Ethiopians who thought in English and spoke in our language like us. And then we're still paying for it now. All the revolutionaries in Ethiopia in I would say from 1974 with the Derg military junta, overthrew the emperor, was all English revolution. It was Ethiopian kids speaking English, writing in English, literally, thinking in English, that were politically agitating the future of Ethiopia. To this day, Ethiopia is drunk because of that. Now, this is where we lose war. Always, we judge from the physical. When we see a black person in a movie, that is like we go, in this country, every time a new black film come out, Haile is absent. I don't like to debate with black folks. I don't want to be pro and against nothing white folks produced. In the first place, you don't even own it. They produced it. And then I'm arguing with my sister for hours about my take on the movie. I said, the hell with you. You don't find me debating all contemporary dishes you get from Hollywood. I just say, keep eating it. If it's vitamin is helping you, we'll see the result. Because when you eat the cultural diet, and yet you don't make history, that's the judgment of history.
There it is.
Unless the diet is messed up, we should be somewhere else by now. Not be under mercy of this dumb white kids from fraternity house. They came out of fraternity house. And so to me, we're running for nothing, from nothing, because we are mentally unprepared to confront inevitable shift of white America every 20, 30 years. We knew the shift like clocking it. The Black Revolution. I read black literature. That's where I read it. Black people knew every 20, 30 years what happens in America. That's what I read. What those books you see, they mean a lot to because they tell me that.
Yes, sir.
I'm not a history observer, but no, the book said to me, inevitably every 20, 30 years, white folks come back like literally not even repenting, as if, redotting everything they said is needed. Who is destroying reform? White folks. Who proposed reform? White folks, white liberals. Okay, black folks proposed revolution. They got diverted. So we're fighting over reform. And who is destroying the destruction of reform for the best of America?
Yes.
Black people's and progressive people's work.
Yes.
Okay? Native American, all the struggle waged to get America better is reverted back. By what? By white dictatorship, the elite, the liberal, that never changes because deep down they are in charge. And they're ruling, even now, to the demise of America, they're in charge. So for me, where are we? And why are we where we are now? It's that physical judgment. Judging always me by my cover, by my look. And instead of by my deeds. Even my deeds, the subtext of my deeds should be scrutinized by people who've been betrayed by the black elite for so many years. That's usually it's easy to target white people. It's a good music. But the black middle class betrayal from the inception of the black struggle, black reformists who go for bribes and sell out change have never been scrutinized critically. And so I'm just kind of responding. My Amharic speaking, I don't go around, we Ethiopians speaking Amharic. The hell with you. What's your mind? You're colonized. Wow. You're colonized. You think in English, in the English empire from the Second World War. You still think in that empire. Although you say many things loudmouthly, you're still incarcerated in that historical epoch. It's what I tell to my own people.
I want to add one thing I forgot. May we work
We'll do it at the end. Thank you for reminding us. There's a brother who wants, a sister here, over here.
Oh, I just wanted to answer the question about what his name means. So shout out to my mom. Somehow she's awake at this time. So, so Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o. She doesn't know what Thiong'o means because that's very clan based. But Ngũgĩ means a hardworking person. So a hardworking son of Thiong'o.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
And don't forget to come tomorrow. We're doing his play.
Okay.
So folks, do not forget tomorrow we're doing Didan Kimati. It will help give us a chance to know Ngugi more and better, and Mishari tomorrow at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. A play on the stage, of course, small. You may think it's not where Beyonce dances, but it's okay here. They will do their humble work. There's a brother.
Appreciate you, sis, and please thank your mom. That's beautiful. A hard-working person. That's a,
There's one there first, and then you come.
Yeah, thank you for giving me about my mask because I had COVID 2 times. So
no problem, brother. We appreciate you.
yeah, I almost died for the first one.
Oh no.
Yeah. At any rate, I met. He was then James Thiong'o in Sweden at the University of Stockholm. I saw the book he signed for me to Professor Haile and the young blood here. And this was 1986. Mind you, Soyinka was awarded the Nobel Prize. And Ngugi was, he had a book signing ceremony at the university in one of the rooms. And I suppose he was perhaps in Sweden to campaign or whatever it was. He should have won the Nobel Prize before he died. He was a great writer. And Petals of Blood was the book that he signed for me. And all things considered, he was a great writer. Going back to these Ken Burns thing, they had what is called the Ethiopian Regiment in the Civil War of African Americans.
Lord Dunmore, Virginia, yes.
Of the African Americans, they named the Ethiopian Regiment. I don't know why. Maybe
Yes.
you can talk about that. And also, issue of language. I want to spill a family secret here. I come from the Oromo people in Ethiopia, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So when we created our own writing system outside of Amharic, we called the Kube. There was a huge uprising everywhere within the Ethiopian community as well as on a national level. And we said, look, we want to learn in our own language because to get into the university during the emperor's time, you have to pass the Amharic language test. A lot of Oromos were flanking. So language issue is very complicated, and it's, I don't know what percentage of Kenyans speak Ngugi's language. So Kiswahili was, I suppose, is the common language within the Kenyan community. So the language issue is very, very difficult, even within the country as great as Ethiopia, that has a large population. The Oromos are the largest population in Ethiopia, but it's still, they forbid the Oromo language to be broadcasted on radio during the emperor's time. My father, who was an Air Force officer, and other people used to listen to our own language from Somalia and then from Kenya, broadcasting. They say in Ethiopia, oh, the Oromo language will break the radio, so don't, that's the joke. So language is very intriguing in any community. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Baba. Yeah, I think on the Ethiopian regiment, when Dunmore made that offer for the Africans in Virginia to fight with the British and they would free them, and so many signed up. Many of them, of course, as you know, died from disease before they could do that. But I think the reason they called it the Ethiopian Regiment was because that became the label for all of us in the 18th century.
The historical context is in the Dismal Swamp, the Great Dismal Swamp, the Maroons took a name. He asked them, what would you call yourselves? And he said, we call ourselves Ethiopian Legionnaires.
Yes, sir.
And that is because of the Ethiopia's history at that time.
Yes, absolutely.
And so it's part of the Maroonage
Absolutely.
in North Carolina and Virginia area, the Great Dismal Swamp. Well, no, I wouldn't help a white boy. I wouldn't help a white boy. No way. No way, Jose. But in the back.
Haile, I just, it's an academic question in a way. You were talking about how, mind and language, which is what Ngugi talks about also. But Ngugi also pointed out that the people in the diaspora had their language stripped from them in a particular way, but the people in the continent still could speak their languages but weren't doing it, were even putting each other in jail for speaking their own languages. Now, you made a more subtle point. I wanted to ask you, in more peripheral areas in Ethiopia, maybe where people had not received that English education that you're talking about, would you argue that in those areas that people had kept more of the cultural content, or this thing that you're calling, that you're saying is the authentic, that you're implying is the authentic non-anglicized self? Or do you think that...
No, let's take my brother my brother Jimma here, who spoke about the Oromo people. They're largest, have amazing particular culture within Ethiopia, and spiritual culture, etc. The problem of the elite of the Oromo is when they revolted to empower their language, they did it in Latin. For me, that's my problem.
Wow.
I will not argue with Oromos about this because they're entitled to go they can make Roman language out of it. But to me, to go to Latin is the bankruptcy of the Oromo elite. The elite is like can come up with, they could have chosen Wolof, they could have chosen even Swahili, but to choose Latin, to revolting against the Amharic domination, which is true, which is real, but then to turn around shows you what I'm saying. The elite revolts still within the confinements of the Eurocentric planet, period. Otherwise, why would I want, when you look at, for example, the Orominya he's talking about, Mecha, for example, Mecha, in English, in Latin, sounds so crazy. It needs 3-4 letterings to write it, okay? But if we didn't fight, if we were not feuding, Amharic or Giz or Tigrinya is closer to say che, cha, chu, chi. The Oromos have those sounds they make, which is like we do. But then since we're fighting, we black people can get along together. And because I don't like you, you have oppressed me. Therefore, I'm going to choose white man's language. Period. I'm out there. With that, I'm out. I'm not there with you. I am there when you revolt to empower your own mother tongue. But to go back to Eurocentric tongue is an insult to the Oromo people, in my view. Now, this is unpopular to say that because I come from Amharic-speaking Ethiopia. I'm in the center of the feud. But intellectually, what I learned over the years in cinema, cultural debate, due to my involvement with the Pan-African movement in Africa and Europe, for me, I have nothing in common to write in English, to write in Latin, to write in Francophone, Lusophone. This is where African intellectuals have to do their homework, work hard,
that's right,
and come up with something.
Yeah, that's what Ngugi said, and I think.
Excuse me, I don't want to argue with you because I think we should pay tribute to Ngugi. He's a giant, in my view, a giant. I cannot write one paragraph of Petals of Blood, but at the same time, I don't agree the mechanics of that debate on speaking your language. I'm extremer than him on that.
Oh, okay.
I told you that's what I illustrated. But he's not around to defend himself or something. For me, with many African intellectuals have a problem because whatever they propose, they continue to be in the custodianship of that colonial process. And for me, revolution is all the way. Tear down that keeps you paralyzed. Otherwise, what is wrong with us? Why are we still in the Sudan Civil War?
There it is.
What is wrong with us in Congo? We're in Leopold's ghost period.
Yeah.
What is wrong with us? Why are we still treadmilling where our people are suffering to eat, to go to basic schools? Our people have no right of movement from Congo to Ethiopia to. What are we talking about?
Yes.
We have not done our homework. Here too, I spoke about. Black people's condition don't say to me much about the elite's claim. Okay? We can claim because we speak the master's language. When they want to interview, it's us they interview. When Zimbabwe is happening, who do they interview? Not the peasants who don't speak English.
No.
It's the ones they educated here, sent them there. They interview. What is wrong with you Negroes down there? This is the reciprocation we have. And I'm saying, even me, I will not want to be interviewed about Ethiopia in the case now. Only as a filmmaker, I tell you that the problem of the African elite everywhere have failed their people. Yes. They are hypocrites.
Absolutely.
It's easy for me to hide behind scapegoating white people, yeah, which is a fact. But to me, who is the midwifing white power over me? Black people.
That's true.
There's no anybody here who would say, white people have so much power over me, I can't even move. They keep moving my hands. There's always middle black people, the weak link for our condition. And we refuse to tangle with that tiger. Black people.
That's true.
To me, no white person can come near me without a black person. When I made Ashes and Embers, when they try to trick the black woman to take her land, who do they send? A black guy with a white guy.
Absolutely.
And who is speaking in my film to buy her land, to convince her to sell? The black guy. The white guy is just, I sanction him to speak for us. That's what's happening now. They have black people saying everything they want to say now. They don't need no white spokesperson.
Right.
That's black mask, white skin. That's found alive in the middle of us. And none of our movies express it. None of what we do express it. We think it's normal that black people are homeless. It's normal. We walk all over them, begging and starving. And to me, I'm very, on this thing, I am like, we, the petty bourgeois black people, history is x-raying our hypocrisy. And we don't know how to take it. That, to me, is the problem.
Professor Haile, I just wanted to inform you on what the reason the reason it was decided to use the Latin alphabet. It was only 26 alphabets. The Amharic, as you know, is a huge. And then the sound of the Ge'ez alphabets don't match the Oromo sounds. Yeah, sometimes if you want to call Badada, can you say Badada? They say Badada, it becomes an insult.
Yeah, but Badada, if you take Badada,
yeah,
and then give the Oromo accent by creating, I think all I'm saying is this, the Oromo intellectual should be clever enough to say, I'll tell you, to me, the Latin is like scratching my ear with my, the other way. To me, the Latin, you cannot, I agree with you that even the Amharic may not accommodate certain letters. Yes. For that, why not the Oromo elite invent, okay, another code? Like, because language is always created by the people who are, who want to empower their language. And I'm saying there's laziness in the Oromo elite to just take English, because when you take 3 letters to spell cha, okay, that to me automatic is like accommodating the longest journey to the language. And I'm not saying it should be Amharic. I'm just saying, how about others? Other, could it be Wolof? I don't know. Homework, you see, what I'm saying is this, my brother. I think our elite is lazy. We don't know how to invent when we're dissatisfied. That's now a problem. We don't invent our revolution. We don't invent something. Even why are we even arguing about Donald Trump? Why is he so important in our mouth? Why do I hear, how many people come to talk to me about him, what he did every day? How many people emailed me, professors? And I'm saying, I have no time to say his name. I don't want him to occupy my psyche because that is a spiritual displacement, but they're lazy. African American elites are lazy. They finally found a tiger to tangle with. I don't consider him a tiger. He never made sense to me. He never made a sentence. He never made a grammar sense to me. So why would I? But the elite bankruptcy gravitates towards being critical towards Trump because that's the easiest, the lowest fruit in the tree. Because everybody knows this guy is openly bad. He says, we bring racist white people from South Africa. That says everything to me. Why would I even be concerned about him? So to me, all I'm saying is, I think when we talk about revolution, we know from our country, even the revolution was conceived in English thinking. I remember one time we were discussing Ethiopian feudalism. And an Ethiopian intellectual came from Ethiopia and said, feudalism applies for the British period of feudalism before capitalism. But in Ethiopia, you don't have that context. Can we invent our own that is particular to Ethiopia? And they laughed at him, saying he's like uneducated for challenging our English thinking system. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I understand. It's rebelling against the oppression. LL Rebellion, what your book, I read, so that's what it was, actually.
I admit that, yeah. Is there any last question for Carr, please? For Carr.
Okay. What y'all think about
No, we're going to do the prayer.
I have something. It's not about that. I want to know, because we talk about Africa a lot, when we talk about niggas in America, the role of Ebonics. Ebonics,
Black
I think
people in America or African people in America?
This is how I choose to refer to my people here.
You love them so much. I'm sorry. So what's the question? Let me empower you with a microphone.
My question is on.
I'm not touching it. Directed to him.
The language that we speak, right?
Thank you.
People from Tennessee, people from the South, even here in DC is not necessarily. I know people have their own Ebonics, language, so forth. We talk about the mental state of liberation. I see speaking in Ebonics, especially in quote unquote white spaces or popular American space. You speak in Ebonics, you're gonna have a certain level of self-expression. And so I wonder, of course, inspired by the late Ngugi, how do we factor in Negro language, or what I call nigger language?
Why do you call it nigger language?
Nigger, because that's how we.
ERAOAE.
I call it that because that's how we.
Nigger.
That's who we is.
Niggas.
Nigga, that part, because it holds the energy of what it is.
Heard the Kendrick Lamar argument as well. Yes, I understand, but I'm just saying all the variations. What is it about the love for that word?
It's not even the love. It's just a recognition of the status of reality.
The low degraded.
It ain't even low degraded. I don't degrade it. I like, hey, that's my nigga. I say it in love.
Does it predate our captivity?
I'm more so wondering about the presence of Ebonics in. Who? R. Kelly.
Oh yeah, R. Kelly. No, but I mean, and I'm serious. I mean, it's a conversation we had to have because there is a class dimension. There's a lot of niggas out there.
Right. Because when I say niggas, you know who I'm talking about. I'm not talking about Caribbeans.
I know you
talking
about the descendants of slaves.
No, I'm talking about the people who have been reclassified many times. But
right.
I'm talking about.
But you're not talking about Anybody other than those who are in the United States of America.
Yeah.
Right.
Generational.
So this is.
I'm talking about the language we speak.
No, but I
Right.
know. Well, I mean, okay. Actually, that's good. You know.
And I'm not talking about Spanglish or none of that. I'm
No,
talking
you
about.
talking about what? Well, I don't know. Let me ask you. Are
Not
you talking
Gullah
about,
Geechee or none of that either. I'm
Are
just
you-
talking about nigga talk.
You said Ebonics when you started.
I said Ebonics because I
You
feel
don't
like
mean
that's
you
the,
don't mean Ebonics though.
I do mean Ebonics.
You
I
do?
think it's the same.
Oh well, in that case, then okay. So, do you mean what Robert Williams meant when they met in 1972 in St. Louis? Well, he worked at St. Louis, YSU, Association of Black Psychologists. When they coined that term, Ernie Smith, Robert Williams, when they said Ebonics, literally ebony sounds, meaning black sounds, not black English. In other words, the sound, like for example,
No, I'm talking more so about.
I'm just being clear because if you're
I'm
going to
not
use
talking
it,
about those ones.
so that means you're not talking about Ebonics.
I'm talking
you're
about
making
what
up your own
I'm
definition.
talking about what they were grasping at. I think that they used the as a way of reaching towards something even more primal, coming from
So
like
the response to that was
when you go to not even that one.
no. I'm just
When-
saying. Meaning
when you
what?
go to like, let's say
Expressing skepticism.
when you
that's
go
a
home
sound.
and you talk to your big mama, your grandmama, what was spoken on the land? You know that those things that how we talking
Where
right
was
now?
your big mama?
Huh?
Where was your? Mine was in Alabama.
My big mama was in Kentucky.
Okay, so Appalachian.
Appalachian, I'm on the other side of Kentucky.
Okay, Western Kentucky,
The Central,
Central Kentucky.
Christian County.
Okay.
But even down into Louisiana, Mississippi, the
So someone, for example, from that region, a little bit further south, but not too far south,
Like
like
the-
Bell
the-
Hooks or Nikki Giovanni. Well, Nikki Giovanni's a little bit east of that. What would they say to you if you said that your big mama doesn't speak the same language as a Gullah Geechee or somebody in Puerto Rico or Dominican Republic, or for that matter, somebody in West Africa from which all them people were trafficked? What would you say to that? She's not connected to them.
well,
right?
I think there are carryovers of the indigenous language, like the Shaniquas and the Chattahoochees and
the indigenous people.
The indigenous people
Absolutely.
that became prisoners of war,
Right.
and
Were
melded
those,
in
were,
with
were, those,
Africans.
were those indigenous people originally Africans?
I don't think so. I think that they were already here, like we saw in Texas.
No. I'm just following this because I
No,
think,
can you let him finish and then?
absolutely.
So we don't,
Thank you. No, I think this is important
People are
because
leaving us. You know how we.
you know, well, I'll limit
One
this.
sister is lying down like this, saying,
Well, you know
I
that's
think
what it
I
happens.
should sleep.
We're not strong like we used to be. We've been weakened. Niggas weakened. I mean, I would just bring it full circle with this. I quote the last poets. You know, the last poets. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I love niggas because niggas are me. And I should only love that which is me. I love to hear niggas rap. I love to see niggas make the moves and shoot the shit. But one thing about niggas I do not love, niggas are scared of revolution. So that's what the last poet said. I don't know that you can inhabit the concept of nigger and transformation, because a nigger is a thing that was created outside of us. And to embrace that means I am not only, if not content with my condition, I don't think my condition can change. That's what I would say to this.
So, burning question from the back. Those who didn't speak didn't get a chance.
I mean, that's what I mean, you know.
Anybody?
I'm sorry we used
Young
this so long.
sister, you have no question. You always come and then just leave. You scared?
Because she's thinking.
You scared?
See?
Anybody?
That's not fear. Like, I don't know what you all.
Okay, everybody.
Let me think about this.
You sure?
We're gonna have a moment.
Okay.
For
You
Ngugi.
know, we make sure he doesn't sneak out quickly. Get hold of him.
Can't move. I ain't had no
Access him
sleep
as
like
much as
that.
you can, folks. It was so, in my view, the best way we could remember in Ngugi is in this kind of discourse.
Absolutely.
Especially on his theory of the weapon, the decolonization, the barrel of the gun,
Yes.
the pen.
Yes.
All these
Barrel of the
things
pen.
triggers all this debate and discussions. I think he's a major contributor of not only African literature, but in my view, African critical discourse. And hopefully you guys grab a book by him, etc. And then hopefully you come tomorrow and see the play. You better reserve quickly. We've become, the demand is high. It's already, I know 25 people had signed already.
Oh, really?
So yeah, we have I know if he didn't sign in, he ain't coming in.
Did I
This guy
sign?
here.
Oh,
Thank you so much
If
for
I'm breathing,
coming.
I'll be-
Seriously, and Carr, my brother, as always, thank you.
Thank you.
my brother. Thank you for your.
There's a place to
spirit.
come because of you. Thank you.
Shout out.
Yes. 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 Oh, yes. Can I get up?
Thank you so much. I mean it, Carr. We don't want to take you for granted.
What? Oh, I'm good.
Thank
No,
you
we
so
will
much.
take you for granted. What's up?
Thank you.
Listen, man.
Well, you don't have a question.
You didn't get a chance to explore your question. You're raising a very important question when you say, well,
Dambuzi is the name of the
the culture necessarily.
No,